You've probably had this thought on a bad day in a crowded city. Too many people. Not enough space. Something about it feels wrong in a way you can't quite explain. You'd assume the problem is just discomfort. Too many bodies. Too little room. Your patients wearing thin from noise and elbows, and strangers standing too close. But the real answer is stranger than that. And it comes from an experiment that had nothing to do with humans at all. In 1968, a scientist named John B. Calhoun built a box. Not a small box. A steel enclosure about the size of a small apartment, divided into pens, ramps, and nesting spaces, with food dispensers built into the walls so nothing ever ran out. He called it Universe 25. Then he did something simple. He put 4 pairs of mice inside. Perfect health. Unlimited food. Unlimited water. No predators. No disease. Nothing to kill them, and nothing to stop them from breeding. By any measure you'd expect, this should have been paradise. For the first few months, it was. The mice bred quickly. Every 55 days, the population doubled. More mice, more litters, more life filling up the box. Calhoun and his team at the National Institute of Mental Health watched the numbers climb, and for a while, everything about it looked like success. This was, after all, the whole point of the experiment. Calhoun wanted to know what happens to a population when every physical limitation is removed. What's left to stop it? Then something changed. Not the food, not the water, not the temperature. The only thing that changed was the number of mice sharing the same amount of space. Around day 315, population growth started to slow. Not because mice were dying faster, because something in their behavior was breaking down. Mothers began abandoning their litters mid-birth. Some carried their pups to new nests over and over, dropping them along the way until the pups were left scattered and unprotected. Others attacked their own young outright. Males that once fought hard for a defined territory stopped defending anything at all. They wandered the box in packs, attacking without any clear reason, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone, with no pattern connecting the violence to any resource actually worth fighting over. There was no food shortage driving it. There was no mate being contested. The aggression had detached itself completely from any purpose. And then came the mice Calhoun started calling the beautiful ones. These were mice that withdrew completely from the group. They stopped mating. They stopped fighting. They stopped forming any kind of social bond at all. They spent their days eating, sleeping, and grooming themselves over and over, for hours, with no interest in anything happening around them. Their coats were flawless, glossy, perfectly maintained. Their behavior was empty. They had every physical need met and had simply given up on doing anything with the life that met it. Calhoun had a term for what he was watching. He called it the behavioral sink, a point past which social behavior doesn't just get worse, it collapses entirely, not because resources ran out, because the social structure that once made cooperation, parenting, and territory possible had stopped functioning under the weight of too many individuals trying to occupy roles that space and instinct could no longer support. By day 600, births had stopped almost entirely. The population that had once numbered over 2,000 mice began to shrink. Not from famine, not from disease, from a kind of social exhaustion so complete that mice stopped forming pairs, stopped raising young, stopped building anything resembling a functioning group. Within a few years, every single mouse in Universe 25 was dead. The box that had everything a mouse could ever need ended in total extinction. Calhoun ran variations of this same experiment more than 20 times over the following decade. the ending never changed. Calhoun actually broke the whole collapse into 4 distinct phases, labeled simply A through D. Phase A was the settling-in period, when the first 4 pairs explored their new home and claimed the first territories. Phase B was the explosive growth you'd expect from any species handed unlimited resources and no threats. Phase C was the phase where things started fraying at the edges, litters unraveling, violence spiking, a social hierarchy breaking down faster than new mice could be born into it. Phase D was the one that gave the whole experiment its grim reputation. Calhoun called it, plainly, the death phase. Not a slow decline. A population that had stopped aiming at anything at all, reproduction included. Now, here's where you'd expect the story to be simple. Overcrowding causes chaos. Chaos causes collapse. Lesson learned. Move on. But researchers who went back to Calhoun's data decades later found something far more complicated. A historian named Edmund Ramsden, who spent years re-examining Calhoun's original notebooks and publications, pointed out that Universe 25 wasn't really testing density on its own. It was testing something closer to social role failure. There was still physical space in that box when the collapse began. What ran out was something else entirely. Positions, purpose, a place in the group that made sense to occupy. Think about that for a second. The mice weren't crushed against each other with nowhere left to move. Ramsden's review of the enclosure's layout showed corners that stayed nearly empty, even while the beautiful ones clustered together doing nothing at all. The problem wasn't a shortage of square footage. It was a shortage of meaningful roles for a population that had grown far faster than its social structure could ever absorb. This is where the story stops being about mice. A psychologist named Jonathan Friedman ran a separate line of research decades ago, testing what actually happens to humans crammed into small spaces. What he found didn't match the assumption everyone walked in with, that density alone makes people miserable or aggressive. Instead, crowding intensified whatever emotional tone was already present in the group. Put people who liked each other into a small space, and they liked each other more. Put strangers with no real connection into that same space, and the tension spiked fast. Density wasn't the cause of collapse on its own. It was an amplifier for whatever social fabric already existed underneath it, or didn't. Now think about your own life for a second. Not your apartment, not your commute, your feed. You are, right now, living inside something that looks a lot like Universe 25. Not because you're short on physical space. Most people watching this have more room, more comfort, and more access to food and safety than nearly any humans in history. What's changed is the sheer number of social signals hitting you every single day. Every scroll puts you in contact with more people, more opinions, more comparisons, more performances of other people's lives than a human brain evolved to process in a lifetime, let alone an afternoon. You were built for a social world of maybe 150 people. That's roughly the number your brain can track in terms of relationships with any real depth, a figure the anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years documenting across human groups, from hunter-gatherer bands to modern military units to Christmas card lists. Your feed does not contain 150 people. It contains thousands. Tens of thousands, if you count everyone whose face, post, or comment crosses your screen in a single week. And like the mice, you don't run out of space. You run out of roles. There's no clear place for you inside a crowd that large. No defined position. No stable status. No group small enough to actually belong to in the way your ancestors belonged to. A tribe, a village, a hunting party, a family unit that knew your name and needed you specifically for something. So some people respond exactly like Calhoun's aggressive males, picking fights online that have no real stakes, no resource on the line, just tension circling and looking for a target. A stranger's opinion becomes a battlefield with nothing actually at risk. Others respond more like the beautiful ones, withdrawing quietly, scrolling instead of connecting, performing self-care instead of living it, grooming an online image for hours instead of building a real relationship in minutes, present, technically, endlessly online, but checked out from anything that requires risk, effort, or actual mutual need. Look at the 4 phases again, but this time as a mirror instead of a mouse study. Phase A is childhood, when your social world is small enough that everyone in it has a name and a role. Phase B is adolescence and early adulthood, when your network explodes outward through school, work, and eventually a phone that connects you to everyone at once. Phase C is where a lot of people quietly are right now, present in more group chats, feeds, and follower lists than any nervous system was ever built to hold, watching relationships fray at the edges under the sheer volume of them. Phase D is the quiet one, not a dramatic collapse, just a slow drift into the beautiful ones, well-groomed, well-photographed, and functionally alone. None of this means you're doomed to end up in a box with the door welded shut. Calhoun's mice had one thing you don't have: no ability to notice what was happening to them and choose something different. You do have that ability, even if it doesn't always feel like it at 2 in the morning with a phone lighting up your face. The fix isn't abandoning every crowded space you're in. It's the same thing Ramsden's reanalysis kept circling back to, decades after the original experiment ended. Role, not room. A small number of people who actually know your name, who would notice within a day if you disappeared, who need you for something specific and real rather than just watching you exist. Not a following. Not an audience of strangers scrolling past. A tribe small enough to fit inside the wiring you were actually born with. The same wiring that kept your ancestors alive long before anyone built a box, a feed, or a follower count. None of Calhoun's mice ever got a second box to compare their situation against. They had no memory of a smaller world, no sense that things had ever been different, no way to name what was happening to them even as it happened. You have all 3. You can remember a smaller circle. You can name the drift. And naming it is usually the first thing that stops it from finishing the job. Because here's the reframe that actually matters. You didn't feel that wrongness in the crowded subway car because there wasn't enough air, or enough space, or enough patience left in you for one more stranger pressing against your shoulder. You felt it because some very old part of your brain was doing the same math. Calhoun's mice were doing in a steel box in 1968. Counting bodies. Counting roles. And coming up short on the second number, no matter how full the first one got.